Hello and welcome to this revision guide to Paper 2 Section B, the transactional writing section of an English GCSE. Today this focus is going to be on speeches and how they are assessed in the actual exam. As normal, let's take a quick look at the mark scheme. You've got your band 5 there, your highest grades, your grades 7, 8s and 9s would come from there. You've got your band 4, band 3 and then band 2 and 1 underneath that. You can see on one side it says for communication organisation and on the other vocab, sentence structure, spelling and punctuation. So on the left you've got the ways you tackle the question, how you link to your audience, how you show that you can deliberately link to the task being set, and on the right hand side is your basic writing skills, the general writing skills you might want to use in any piece of writing you do throughout your life. The band 3 at the bottom of the screen there is roughly your pass grade, and in order to pass this English exam you probably want to get about half marks all in all. So at the top end of band 3 would probably secure your grade 5. So let's focus our attention on that for the moment. To get a grade 5, you need clear understanding of the purpose and format of the task. And we're looking at speeches today, so it must begin and end like a speech. It must show clear awareness of the reader or audience, so you must link to the target audience you're being given and show that you're writing directly to them rather than just a group of people in general. The next bullet point is saying the register is appropriately adapted, and that might be formal or informal depending on the task being set. Content is developed and appropriate responses are given to support opinions. That's where you add detail to your paragraphs. If you're often writing paragraphs maybe 3 sentences long, you would not pass the test on that because that does not show development of ideas. Ideas are clearly organised into coherent arguments, likely to be paragraphs for and against perhaps the topic you're being asked to write about. There's some shape and structure in the writing, and that might well be paragraphs, but also sequence paragraphs. Firstly, secondly, thirdly would be a really easy way of showing a sequence or progression of your ideas. And lastly, communication has clarity and fluency. That means then as you read it, you're inspired to read more sentences linked together. You're carried away with the writing. You want to see what's going to be said or written next. Here's a copy of those last 2 bands I mentioned then, band 2 and band 1, and obviously 0 marks at the bottom there. Pause the video. This would be kind of your grade 3s and lower probably would be representing the skills on the board here. We're now going to look at then some things you could revise ready for this test. Well, you need to know the conventions of a talk or speech. You need to know the appropriate tone for the right audience. You need to know how to write a topic sentence plan with a range of arguments in a clear structure. You need to know how to write developed paragraphs, e.g. a strong topic sentence followed by particular examples. You need to know how to write consistently in one tense, so you shouldn't be jumping from past to future to present. You need to ensure that all your full stops and capital letters are in the right places, and there should be no comma splicing. There should be a range of all 3 sentence structures. You should show the best vocab you know how to use. And you should get your key spellings right. And it depends what grade you want, depending on how many spellings that might be. The exam will punish you if you tend to get just general everyday spellings wrong, but for the higher order vocab they will forgive a couple of mistakes in your response. Now the exam would have been kind enough to furnish you to school with some examples of successful answers. They've handily provided a bullet pointed list here of what makes a successful response or a successful exam in their eyes. This is kind of a summary then of all the responses they had in last year's exam and what they thought was particularly good about those. Again, please pause the response here to look through this list and maybe think about how you write your own work and what targets you've been given in the past. Equally, the exam board have provided the responses that are less successful. You notice there they say content is brief. That means then that there's not much written on the page. Students with only half a side of writing, for example, would fall under this. Or equally, if you tend to do really short paragraphs all the time with only 1 or 2 sentences in each one. There is a limited or uncertain sense of register and purpose. That's where the candidate or the person being examined hasn't really thought about why they're writing or who they're writing to, and there's no evidence that they've given it that thought. Layout and letter conventions may be insecure or ignored, so if it doesn't read like a speech in this case, that will be a limited response. We've got a limited sense of intended audience, so if, for example, you're asked to write to young people, speech for young people or your peers, if you haven't taken notice of that and aren't directly linking your examples to that target group, that would then also provide a limited response. It says specific examples given supportive argument may be limited or unconvincing. That's where silly names might come in. So if you've chosen kind of comedy names, that would then limit the focus or the engagement of your argument. Equally, if you've given sort of examples that either far too exaggerated or don't seem to fit the topic of the speech, again, that might support a limited, less successful response. And lastly, the last bullet point in that first section, there may be limited or uncertain structure of the letter or speech. That might be then that a student who hasn't finished, a student who doesn't end with "thank you for listening," that would say then suggest a limited structure. Somebody didn't really use the time effectively to actually start and end their response. And then for AO6 or vocab, sentence structure, spelling and punctuation, you can see expression phasing lacks fluency or clarity. In other words, we're unsure quite what you're trying to say in your speech. Errors are basic and or numerous, and that might be where your spelling errors come in. Tenses may be inconsistent. Vocab is limited or used inappropriately. That's where inappropriate language counts as any kind of swearing or anything like that in your response, means you've limited or made your answer less successful. And equally, if you just use the very basic words. So let's say you're being asked to write to year 7 or year 6. If you just limit your vocab to what you think that audience can understand, for example, only using words like good or bad, that would then obviously limit your response as well. After all, this is an English exam you are writing, so you really have got to show off quite what you can do here. This is the exam question then. We're going to see some responses too, and you can see it's labelled 2.1. The exam would give you a target audience. They give you a rough idea of how long they want your response, and they give you some bullet points to kind of guide your answer if you're stuck for ideas. So let's now read the task itself. Many older people do not use modern technology because they do not understand it and are perhaps afraid of it. You've been asked to give a talk to older people, encouraging them to make use of modern technology. So older people is the target audience. The topic is modern technology. And you know it is a talk or speech that you're being asked to write. So if you think about okay, your target audience, your purpose, the type of writing you're being asked to do, all those ingredients are there. Now they suggest your talk should include one or more of the following: the internet, social media, smartphones and tablets, and then it asks you to write what you would say. It says 300 to 400 words, so that's approximately then 1 to 2 sides of writing for each one. It should take you between 25 and 30 minutes to write your response, and the responses in the actual exam are what we're now going to talk through and why they got the grades they did. Here is our first candidate or first example then. Immediately we can see they did use paragraphs. We can see the examiner has underlined the spelling errors, and they would be deemed as frequent, looking at the number there, almost per sentence. There are a couple of basic errors in punctuation. The word isn't stands out in the first line there, missing its apostrophe. But we do clearly see it is a speech. The world is evolving. Isn't it about time you do too? Look around, everywhere you look, there is technology. It's become part of our lives and a big help in our young children. Why not enjoy it? The world is changing and you need to change with it, so stop what you're doing, pick up a phone and enjoy what life has to offer. So in terms of engagement and getting the purpose right, that's definitely accurate. This is using rhetorical devices, it is being persuasive. I'm not quite sure whether it's targeting the exact audience of older people yet. I think this could be a speech pretty much to anybody. But the lack of punctuation, the lack of spellings there is really so far letting it down. We then continue into paragraph 2. Technology isn't as scary as you might think, as it offers you knowledge, excitement and fun. Well, a nice use of magic 3 there. For example, okay, going on to give an example of what this person means, how new technology can be exciting. You've got a rhetorical question, think about your place to go out and find your family. And well, the in torrents, I think that says, can give you a list of options to choose from. Just go on Google. Maybe a question you've been asked is you're struggling on. Well, Google is the answer for you. Just type in the question. Now at this point, it's getting quite difficult to read because of the lack of punctuation. I see what this candidate's trying to do, but I'm finding myself stumbling over the writing simply because of the lack of full stops and the lack of punctuation not being used in this case. As I look through the answer now, I can see the vocab is okay. They've certainly tried to write a speech. They're linking directly to the task itself, repeatedly using the word technology. And they're beginning to ask about your family. And well, that does begin to link to the older audience. I think on one side of the mark scheme, it's quite low in terms of its technical accuracy. But in terms of communication and organisation, actually there's a lot of marks being gained here. There's a lot of persuasive techniques being used, and they're using a kind of informal style that is suitable to a speech. As we move on to the middle section or near the end section of the speech, we see many sort of capital letter errors creeping in there. Again, apostrophes now routinely missing. And we have these phrases like, maybe you have a lot of free time. Well, a phone tablet can help you with that too. Just download games online. So there is evidence of suggested different sentence structures there. And again, it does sound casual, informal, friendly, like speech should. Here's the ending then. We learned that isn't it about time? We learned about technology too. And you can see the exam board there have said it shows some understanding of the purpose of the task, but has many basic errors. They've awarded 5 communication, but 2 for its technical accuracy, giving an overall mark of 7. Well, if we look back at the mark scheme now, you'll see a 7 gives them a high band 2 response. So that would put it round about a bottom end of a grade 4, more or less. It has lack of accurate punctuation, accuracy errors throughout, and not much control of its sentence structure or its paragraphing. Now let's take a look then at a much higher response. Technology, the despise or pinnacle of our social experience. Let me tell you now that you're completely missing out if you aren't up to date. Short, sharp introduction there. Yes, there is one error, but certainly other quite high level words like experience are spelt correctly. It's definitely a speech, let me tell you. Suggests it's definitely a speech that I'm reading. We then have the second paragraph clearly beginning in sequence with the word firstly. Firstly, there's the internet. Now immediately I'm left suggesting that this person is going to list various different positives of technology and give examples of each one. That opening topic sentence really suggests this person is creating an argument that's going to be developed. I can see that from the level of detail in the paragraphing, that's going to start sort of giving me examples. Now if I start reading that through, you'll see a reference in line 3 of paragraph 2 to grandsons. That immediately then targets our older audience. This person's definitely got in mind the target audience they're writing to. We've got higher level punctuation, like brackets being used next. And we also have some rhetorical questions being used with nothing, full stop, exactly, full stop being our short, sharp sentences for effect at the end of paragraph 2. Then it goes inside of this mystical internet. Now the word mystical is quite a rare word to find in an exam answer, so that will count as high level or advanced vocabulary. And then we've got reference to social media apps. So now moving on to the second bullet point the exam gave of possible topics to talk about. You can see there's quite a high level, so it sounds quite enthusiastic. So it says you download it, sign up, and you're good to go. The alliteration "good to go" is quite memorable there, and so seeks to persuade the target audience to do as being asked in the speech. Then that's followed up with a rhetorical question. Do you want to know what your friends are having for tea, or would you rather see your son or daughter's pictures? A clear reference again to the older audience and older audience interests. Well, comma, that should be. The good news is with Facebook you can do both. You can see there most commas are right with only one or two missing. So this person's probably missed out on the higher grades based on one or two errors on something like comma usage, which is seen as kind of mid-level kind of punctuation by the exam board. Let's move to the next section. You can see again developed ideas are definitely there, half a side also written per paragraph, but don't forget the short introduction at the beginning then counters that. So they're not just writing 10 sentences then coming to a stop, they're varying their paragraph length depending on the purpose of that paragraph. If we read that through, we can see there's very few errors the exam board have picked up on, and the level of vocab remains quite high with a consistent tone of informality and friendliness throughout. Let's move to the end then, and you can see it ends with a short, sharp conclusion, which is clearly labelled with the topic sentence in conclusion. If you don't have any device I've just described, linking back to what was already said in the speech, it is definitely worth getting one. If you don't know how to use it, ask your grandkids. Let technology be the pinnacle of your social experience. It links very nicely to that opening sentence, giving us a circular speech that repeats at the beginning and end the message of what the speech is about. You can see the exam board gave 11 and 7 for this response. Content is ambitious and sophisticated, sustained awareness of intended audience, it's very clear throughout, and sentence construction is controlled and accurate in the most part. That would give an overall grade of 18, or a mark of 18, and if we look back at the mark scheme, that would hit it into the high band 4. It shows consistent understanding of purpose, secure awareness of reader and intended audience, and many of those other features on both sides of that grid are easily ticked off by that response. Okay, let's move on to response number 3. Now, so far we've seen quite a basic response, we've seen a higher level response, and this one I would imagine, looking at the number of red lines on the work, it's going to fit somewhere between the two. Certainly the paragraphing is not as strong as that 18 marker we just looked at. We've got some very long paragraphs there straight from the off that immediately warns me this person isn't really in control of the writing. Let me start this talk by posing a question to you all. How many of you possess a smartphone or tablet? Please raise your hands, question mark. Well, there's slight errors there in the punctuation. The question mark should be after the word tablet, and then please raise your hands should be entered with a full stop. It is effective, but the punctuation is a little bit sort of off there. Yes, comma, just as expected, comma, as an overwhelming majority of you cease to raise your hands. That's a funny way of wording it, which I think the examiner's written expression down the right-hand side. I can see what they're trying to do, but they're a bit muddled in their ideas. Modern technology, I admit, can be inevitably an incredibly daunting thing. And you can see they've added in some adjectives there to help exaggerate their work. And I like the fact that it says, I admit, because it sounds truthful, it makes the speech sound honest. If we now look at spent your childhood sending lessons as opposed to, sending and reading letters as opposed to etc, etc, so it's quite hard to read in places because of handwriting, which requires an unstable reply. However, it's an immensely integral part of the modern world. Again, the word immensely is spelled accurately there, and you can see there's a couple of commas missing, but they are structuring their work. So I think this one aims high in terms of its vocab choices. I think it aims high in terms of its speech writing ability, in terms of it being informal and friendly and linked to purpose. And I like the number of times it links the word I, as if it's I, or the person writing the exam, talking directly to the audience, as of course a speech would be. As we scroll down, you can see there's quite a few ticks, but some more errors in expression there. And I'm beginning to look at the range of punctuation. There's commas, yes, half used accurately, and a couple of question marks, but not much more than that here, although I have just spotted an exclamation mark at the bottom of paragraph 2. Let's look at the next section then. Again, you can see we're aiming at around about, what, 3 errors per paragraph at this point. This person's been editing their work and rewriting it as they go. You can see that from the number of things scribbled out or crossed out. And you can see, though, it does link to the purpose quite well, but I'm beginning to wonder about the level of links to target audience. I'm not really spotting many links to older people in particular as I read through this response. We now move then to one of the later sections of this response. I've tried to keep it short and concise, so not to exhaust you with an abundance of information. So that's more of a link to older people at the end there. And of course, the last paragraph is much shorter than the others. So that begins to then suggest a kind of structure, but I'm not convinced this person really knew how to structure a speech. They've used a quote near the end. It's impossible, I'll never be able to do it. There's a quote that the target audience might well say in response to this topic. And I like the use of that quote there, but I think probably I would have put that a lot higher up. I think this seems to come a little bit late in the overall structure of the speech. You can see the remaining last paragraphs there. The exam board commenting, it shows understanding of purpose, some ambition in expression, but some errors, generally a decent level of control. So more often than not, the commas are in the right places, but it's just enough to say they generally can use correct sentence structure, but not 100% accurate all of the time. That would give a mark of 7 on the communication side, 4 on the spelling sentence structure side, with an overall mark of 11. Let's take a look at the mark scheme, and that would put this response at the top of band 3. So even with those multiple errors and comma use, the content of the speech there, the development of ideas, and the range of persuasive devices being used secures it a middle band 3, which, to my thinking, in most years would get round about the pass grade, so it would be right on the edge of getting a 4+ or a 5-. Now let's take a look at a different style of answer, so a different speech writing task. Once again, 300 to 400 words. You've been asked to give a talk to your class, in this case a speech or talk to your class or your peers, that is young people, with the title, The Person I'd Like to Spend the Day With. Your talk should be about a person who is famous, such as a sportsman, musician, inventor or national figure, someone who from the past, or someone who's not necessarily well known but you admire. So notice once again, it gives lots of suggestions that you could write about in case you're a little bit stuck in the test. Once again, you'll notice it's something that the exam board feel you can connect with and something you should better answer with minimum planning first. Once again, it says write what you'd say in your talk. Let's see what some candidates wrote then in response to this task. You can see they've done a mini plan at the start. Who? Ryan Reynolds. Why? Movies I enjoy, stories. So they've done a brief rundown of why they'd chosen the person first. And we've got good morning everyone. That sounds quite generic, but it is correct for a speech. I hope you're all having a great day, and so you may have to change because you're going to hear me make a speech. Well, not so sure about that. A speech should really be positive and uplifting rather than deflating, as the opening sentence suggests. I would like to kick things off. Okay, that's informal, it's friendly sounding, it also sounds like they're talking to young people. By saying the person I'd love to spend the day with is Ryan Reynolds, it can already see you in the back shaking your head, giving me a chance. So again, it tends to go on negative here, but you can see what they're trying to do. They're taking account of the audience's reactions and thinking how young people might respond. So I like their thinking, but I think it's just perhaps a little bit negative. I think I'd want to give it much more an uplifting tone than that. You know, it's things like, I'm sure you can all think of a wonderful celebrity that you idolize, or I'm sure that all of you, if you named your role model, that many of you might choose a film star or sports icon. No, there's no use shaking your head. Yes, we all have one. Might be how I use that negative, but be a lot more positive and much more detailed in the positive messages I want to send. I think for a high level response, that's probably what I'd expect to see. I don't know if any of you would see this guy on Graham Norton show, but my God, he's funny. That's only in real life. This is because his moves are absolutely hysterical. You can see they're trying to use high-level vocab there. Absolutely hysterical would count as high-level vocab. Unfortunately, the spelling isn't quite strong enough to let this candidate get away with it. Don't you think? question mark. His humour and overall personality is bar none. I mean, I like the tone now. They're trying their best on the vocab front. We've got beginnings of a range of punctuation. Now let's move on. You can see each paragraph now is being formed of maybe 6 sentences or so. And underlining there, you've got some grammatical errors that are beginning to sort of creep in. And as we scroll down there, you can see spelling becomes more of an issue the more ambitious this person becomes. If I look again at the number of sentences being used, I begin looking at how many commas are being used there and their accuracy. It's not trying too hard on the sentence front. The range there isn't very strong, with only the occasional question mark really interrupting what seems to be a series of complex sentences. If we move to the end, you can see a short, sharp conclusion there, but overall quite a limited response, quite generic. It isn't trying too hard to write an effective speech, so rightfully I think it gets a mark of 8 there from the exam board. It shows understanding of purpose, content has some range and development, but quite a lot of basic errors throughout. If we give it a mark of 8 then, that comes in at a low band 3 response, so about 5 marks short of the pass grade all in all. This person really needs to think a lot more detailed. I mean, it was a tricky task to answer. I think they answered quite truthfully in their viewpoint, but really it needed thinking that this is a GCSE response and to really show off what you can do. And just saying a couple of reasons why you like Ryan Reynolds probably wouldn't cover it. You need to really think why he might connect with the audience and what makes him a role model for the young. I'm not sure this speech quite managed that purpose successfully. Let's take another example then. Hello, my name is blank, and I'm here to talk about the person I would like to spend the day with. Well, that's quite a generic answer. It doesn't really give me any detail. It doesn't really connect with the audience, but it is definitely a speech. The word hello is the signifier of that. Have you ever heard of Elon Musk? Of course you have. He's the guy who invented Tesla coils and his space exploration company named, I can't read that, sorry, whatever the space company is named as. You can see short, sharp paragraphs so far. They get a bit longer as we move through the speech, but it is quite generic. This person isn't really trying to persuade all that much, but it has got a range of punctuation with the question marks and exclamation marks being used. I can also spot there an apostrophe in the word he's, short for he is, that's also used accurately. They've run the word Telsa there because it should be a capital letter as it's the name of the company. And you can see there, they're beginning to go on to explain why they choose Elon Musk as their role model, with a paragraph of around about 6 lines or so. I'm beginning to look through now. I'm looking for, again, repeated capital letter errors with the company name, and we've got commas being used in the right places, and they're clearly just explaining why that person would be a good one in the style of a speech. So also, comma, as I mentioned earlier, comma, that links the speech together in a fairly generic way, but there's no doubt that it is being linked. I also admire him is the beginning of paragraph number 4, and again that this isn't really well sequenced. It's quite basic. I also think, in addition, I think is quite simplistic in terms of linking to your audience. And if you're reading this out loud, I think the audience now would be beginning to kind of zone out of this response. So they're losing sort of sight of the engaging element of a speech, I think. And as we move to the end there, you can see it does just enough. It goes through the motions enough to get 12 marks out of the possible 20 awarded. Clear shape and structure, yes, just about. Good understanding of purpose. I mean, there's no doubt then as to what they had to do. Some errors, decent control overall. So it isn't engaging enough to get anything out of really the grade 3. Sorry, not grade 3, band 3. But it does the basics. It gives enough detail. It gives enough sequence. It gives enough examples to enable it to hit into that band 3. There we go, a band 3, low band 4 response. So if we look at the mark scheme there, clear understanding of purposes was definitely there. Clear awareness of reader intended audience, again, they have made reference to the audience there, so it fits that. Clear developed and appropriate reasons given. You know, it does do that. They are developed, they are appropriate. I just felt that to get it into the band 4, I think it needs to be consistently adapted and be well judged and detailed. I'm not sure that was well judged, linked to the purpose being set. I would like it to be a bit more engaging to get it up into the band 4. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I hope listening to those examples was useful. Good luck in your exam.